President Trump caused way more chaos in Russia than in the United States, and that tells us a lot. Now, Trump, of course, is in trouble again. He supposedly pushed former FBI Director Comey to drop these investigations against General Flynn, who had to step down. So, in the worst case, this was obstruction of justice, felony, and this could be grounds for impeachment and all that. So now Republicans are in damage control mode. They're abandoning ship. They want Trump gone, replaced with some other puppet. And meanwhile, Trump's supporters claim Trump is still the champion of the people. But, ladies and gentlemen, if he truly was and he had nothing to hide, why would he even try to talk Comey out of investigating Flynn? Why would he fire Comey? Why would Trump have worked with Flynn and Carter Page and Paul Manafort in the first place? You see, Trump supposedly wants to fight the deep state conspiracy and the establishment, but his associates like Flynn and Manafort, who caused most of the trouble, they seem very much like deep state establishment actors. So the fantasy of Trump, the champion of the people, does not add up. And let's forget for a moment how President Bush shielded his buddies after 9/11 in a legal sense, right? Remember all this, all the events unfolding and not wanting certain people to testify in public and under oath and all of that. So, yes, it's a double standard. Bush didn't get into any trouble for his meddling, and his support circle did not get into trouble for that, but now Trump might get impeached for putting some verbal pressure on Comey. It's not fair, it's a double standard, but still, that does not make Trump a good guy. Just because Bush was bad doesn't mean Trump is good. It's not logic. We saw how Trump reacted after the latest Syrian chemical weapon incident. From the very start, Trump accepted 100% what his advisors and the intelligence community told him. And then he ordered a limited missile strike as a retaliation. So how would Trump react in case of another 9/11 type event? Trump would most likely turn into something worse than Bush, and he would shield powerful people against investigations. Trump never even went after Hillary. During the campaign, he talked about convictions, his fans called for prison, Hillary, lock her up, lock her up. But after the election, Trump immediately shielded Hillary, made positive statements about her in public. So, yes, there are indeed a lot of very questionable contacts between Trump, Trump's people, and the Russians. Business dealings, other dealings, stuff that went on in Trump Tower, and even supposed chance meetings between Trump and Trump's people and certain powerful Russians. So, coincidentally, the same planes were on the same tarmac, and the yacht was at the same place the other guy was, and there's no hard evidence they actually met and discussed anything questionable, but still it looks pretty serious. So all that stuff can't just be dismissed. You can't just ignore it. But again, if Trump was a champion of the people, which he is not, why did he entangle himself with the Russians, thereby weakening his position? How did he expect to be a champion of the people when he made sure, there were going to be huge scandals? Doesn't really add up. Yet, the notion of Trump as a Russian agent also does not add up that much. Why? Because Trump and his partners caused way much more chaos in Russia than the Russians caused in the US. So the impression in the media right now is that the Russians did not take much damage from all of this. It's just the US that is left with all the chaos and paranoia. But dig a little deeper and you will find out that the Russians took a lot of damage. The White House chaos is nothing compared to the chaos in Russia because of all this. So you may have heard a significant number of powerful Russians have been killed. Some in the US, a lot of them in Russia. And some of these dead Russians had direct links, connections to this whole Trump fiasco. Now, the typical conspiracy sites claim this was just the CIA who killed those Russians, but if that was the case, Russia would have retaliated. The CIA can't just kill whomever they want any time of the day. They have to pick their targets carefully. The CIA, for example, can target powerful Syrians or Iranians, cutouts, and middlemen, but the CIA can't just kill high-ranking Russian officials without way too much backlash. Of course, many conspiracy sites, they don't really put in much actual research effort. They don't really know their stuff. They just immediately assume anything that's fishy must automatically be the CIA, even though there's a lot of intelligence agencies out there and there's a lot of different players and such, all of whom play dirty. And it's not just the dead Russians. It's massive rumblings in Russia. Military officers getting reassigned, people getting fired, oligarchs suddenly getting investigated and targeted by the Kremlin. It's rampant paranoia. If something similar was happening in the US, people would think the world is about to end. So, in comparison, you have some investigations in America that might lead nowhere. Maybe the puppet Trump will be replaced by another puppet. But in Russia, it's outright chaos. It's paranoia. It's assassinations. And some names who were suspected as sources of the infamous Trump dossier, the Golden Shower dossier, they turned up dead in Russia. So Trump's dealings with the Russians included helping them to bring money into the US. And the Kremlin is very suspicious of powerful Russians defecting to the West. That's why there's all these travel restrictions for any sort of public officials in Russia. They can't just go anywhere they want. They can't just leave Russia. And there's more restrictions, of course, now for Russian tourists. Just like in the old Soviet days, they say, if you want a nice vacation, go to Crimea, occupied Crimea, have your vacation there, don't go to the West. And also, of course, if Russians are allowed to go, some Russians who are allowed to go into the West, they're under surveillance. They're not trusted. If you go to the West, that makes you a target. It's like the old days of Stalin and the ultra paranoia, which led to a lot of crazy targeting of Russian officials. A lot of them were killed, and that weakened the Russian military. That weakened the Russian intelligence community. There's quite a lot of stories in literature about that time. Stalin killed important military leaders. Thus, the new generation of military leaders made some serious mistakes. And the same thing seems to be going on right now. It's a repetition of the Stalin-era witch hunts. So, Russian oligarchs, over the last couple of years, were losing money fast, and a lot of them are unhappy, and they want to defect to the West, and they want to visit the West again. They hate it in Russia. And paranoia now makes everyone a target. Now remember, in the Stalin days, in the official Western history books, the emphasis is entirely on the witch hunt, but there's almost no emphasis on the actual amount and quality of Western espionage in Russia. So I'm pretty suspicious. After reading tons and tons of volumes, I'm very suspicious about that. I think Western intelligence activity in those days was much higher than is publicly admitted. So therefore, if you spread some additional disinformation, if you get some Russians entangled, and you play some phony documents here and there, you create this hyper paranoia in Russia. And I think that's what happened back then in the 1930s, especially in the 1940s. And I think that's the same thing happening now. So you tell me, who took a lot more damage from all of this? If you think the current situation in the US seems crazy and scary and huge, take a good hard look at what's going on in Russia. So a bit of Trump drama, maybe an impeachment, seems like an affordable price to pay for all the damage that was caused in Russia and will likely be more damage caused in the near future. Trump's actions and the actions of Trump's associates, especially in the recent years, these actions seem like solid intelligence work to me. So Trump may be a Western agent, maybe a double, primarily working for the West but pretending to work for the East. And you know, guys like Flynn, you know, who was in Trump's inner circle. Flynn was head of an intelligence agency, a Western intelligence agency. And guys like McMaster and Paul Manafort. Manafort had some connections with the Bushes and, you know, Republican establishment. So they all seem way more like CIA agents or something like that than Russian agents. So for me, the probability that these guys are Western agents is much higher than those guys being, you know, Russian agents. And why is neither mainstream media nor alternative media considering these possibilities? That Trump is an asset, that, you know, you may have worked as a Western intelligence asset for a while. Maybe this started after he went bankrupt a couple of times and nobody wanted to lend him money. Maybe that's when he got recruited. Maybe he was recruited earlier in his old college days, you know. Maybe his father had already been an asset, you know. Who gets to become a head of state? Usually it's intelligence assets, preferably second generation or third generation intelligence assets. I mean, if you look at, for example, Hillary's past in comparison, I mean, she wasn't exactly born into a lot of money, but her parents, they had some shady, I think Hillary's parents had some shady casino dealings, you know, some underworld stuff. Sounds pretty much like what Trump had going on in his earlier days, you know, the casino stuff and his connections. But, of course, with Trump, there was more money around in his early days. He was born into money, Hillary wasn't, but there's still some similarities. So, at some point, the Russians probably will figure out that they have been deceived all along by Trump. You know, at some point, the Russians are gonna smell, you know, they're gonna smell the rats. The Russians are gonna figure this one out, and by that point, the Russian propaganda will most likely attack Trump as a Western agent. They're gonna present some evidence, and they're gonna mix actual evidence with fake evidence, because that's how the Russians work. So basically, all intelligence agencies work. They have special sections in the intelligence agencies that collect stuff. They collect dirt on people, and they mix that with forgeries. So at some point, when the Russians figure out they've been deceived all along, the Russians will put out some of that material, and the Russians will give that damaging material to their partners in the West, so-called alternative media, and, you know, it's probably going to end up in the hands of WikiLeaks or some other outlet that's been, doing stuff that the Russians like. So at some point, the Russian propaganda will attack Trump as a Western agent, and alternative media is going to follow that line like they always do. So if the Russians say, we gotta hype up Trump, we gotta praise Trump, alternative media says, yay, we're gonna, Trump is the political messiah. When the Kremlin says, okay, now we're getting suspicious here, we'll just cool it off, alternative media says, all right, we're a bit suspicious now, we're gonna wait and see, we're gonna cool it off. And then when the Russians are pissed that Trump launches a retaliatory strike against Syria, when the Russians are pissed and the Russian media says we're pissed, alternative media suddenly says, oh, now we're pissed at Trump. And at some point, all Russians are going to say Trump was an agent all along, Western agent, and then alternative media is going to say the same thing. But then it's going to be pretty late, it's just going to come years and years too late. So just remember, you heard it here first, and it isn't even rocket science. If you like this video, please support us on Patreon with the link below, and visit our site eng.recenter.com. Please like this video, comment below, and share.